All right, so today we're looking at a company that's really putting their mission statement front and center with Solve On.
Yeah.
This is Incyte, and they are all about tackling these really critical unmet medical needs, and they're going after it no matter how rare the condition is.
Yeah, and I think what really stands out there is just this idea of solve on. It's not about kind of, making things a little bit better. It's about really going after those tough problems.
Yeah, they're not afraid of a challenge, are they?
No, not at all.
Well, to get to the heart of how they do this, we've got to dig deep into Incyte Corporation,
Absolutely.
a global biopharmaceutical company focused on discovering, developing, and ultimately bringing their own therapeutics to market.
Yeah, the whole process.
Yeah. Now, for everyone listening, our deep dive today is going to break down a pretty extensive analysis we've put together.
Well, yeah, we went deep.
Yeah, we want to make sure that you walk away with a clear picture of Incyte's business, their leadership, and their financial health.
All those things that really help us understand what makes a company tick.
It's exactly the fundamentals. Yep. And then we'll shift gears in the second half.
Yeah, we've got more.
We'll look at market sentiment, so how investors are feeling about Incyte.
Right, perception's important.
Absolutely. And then we'll examine their ownership structure.
Who owns the company? Who's pulling the strings?
Yeah, and of course, we've got to do a balanced assessment of the risks and opportunities.
Got to look at both sides.
Always the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And we'll wrap up with a question, something to really make you think.
A little something to ponder.
Yeah. Now, before we get too far, I do want to mention all the sources we're using for this deep dive are linked in the description below.
Yeah, go check them out.
So if you want to learn more or, fact check us, be our guest.
Exactly.
All right, let's get this deep dive started by understanding what Incyte's business is all about.
All right, so their main focus is in two key therapeutic areas.
Okay.
Oncology, which is, of course, cancer treatment.
Got it.
And then inflammation and autoimmunity, or IAI. And that's where the body's immune system is basically attacking healthy tissues.
Right, kind of misfiring.
Exactly.
And something that really jumps out from our research is their dedication to research and development.
Oh, yeah. Over 1,000 professionals dedicated to R&D.
That's huge. 1,000 people just focused on innovation.
It really highlights their commitment.
Yeah.
They're not messing around.
So how do they approach this from a business perspective?
Their model is built on that strong R&D foundation.
Okay.
But they also use strategic partnerships and a focus on precision medicine.
Precision medicine, that's about tailoring treatments to individual patients, right?
So you're looking at their genetic makeup or the specifics of their disease.
Yeah, kind of like a personalized approach.
Exactly.
So all of this should translate into revenue, right?
It does. They have a few key revenue streams.
Okay.
The biggest one is product sales.
Yeah.
With Jakafi and Opzelura leading the pack.
Those are their flagship products.
Exactly. And they also have licensing agreements with big pharma names like Novartis and Eli Lilly, collaborating on development and commercialization.
Very smart.
Yeah. And then there's research collaborations and royalties from their drug patents.
So a diversified approach.
For sure.
And I did see their 2024 revenue was pretty impressive, $4.2 billion.
Yep. And that's a 15% year-over-year growth, which is solid.
Very healthy.
Yeah. And Jakafi is really carrying the weight there.
Yeah.
Brought in $2.8 billion in 2024.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's the cornerstone of their revenue right now.
But it sounds like Opzelura is on the rise.
Oh, definitely. It saw a 50% year-over-year increase, reaching $508 million in 2024.
Wow.
What's interesting there is they've successfully expanded into dermatology with Opzelura, which, treats things like atopic dermatitis and vitiligo.
But they're branching out beyond Jakafi's focus on blood disorders.
Exactly, broadening their scope.
Now, beyond Jakafi and Opzelura, what other marketed products do they have?
Okay, so they have Pemazyre for cholangiocarcinoma, which is a bile duct cancer.
Okay.
Dejuvy or Minjuvi for certain lymphomas.
Got it.
Iclusig for certain leukemias.
Right.
Zynyz for Merkel cell carcinoma, a rare skin cancer. And Niktimvo for chronic graft versus host disease.
So pretty diverse range of treatments there.
Yeah, mainly in oncology and dermatology.
And their research pipeline seems heavily focused on targeted and immunotherapies, specifically the JAK-STAT pathway.
That's right.
Now, I have to admit, I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that pathway is and why it's so important for Incyte?
Sure. So the JAK-STAT pathway is the signaling pathway inside cells that plays a big role in immune responses and cell growth.
Okay.
And a lot of inflammatory and cancerous conditions are linked to problems with this pathway.
Ah, I see.
Incyte has been really leading the charge in developing drugs that inhibit this pathway, like Jakafi.
Makes sense.
So they're building on their expertise in targeting a pretty fundamental mechanism of disease.
And they're also involved in rare disease treatments, which fits with their Solve On mission.
Exactly.
They really seem to be aiming for what they call first-in-class medicines.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
So being first in class means their drug is the first of its kind to target a specific pathway or mechanism in a disease.
So they're the pioneers.
In a way, yeah. And this usually leads to strong patent protection, which gives them exclusive rights to market the drug for a while.
Ah, that's got to be crucial for recouping their R&D investments.
Absolutely. It's all about maintaining a competitive advantage.
To give everyone a sense of their size, their market cap is around $11.98 billion as of March 2025.
Yep. And they have over 2,500 employees globally.
So a significant player in the biopharmaceutical world?
Oh, yeah. They have a strong presence in the U.S. market as well,
Okay.
connecting with a large network of oncology specialists and hospital systems.
So their market share in the broader pharmaceutical sector was 1.03% in 2024.
Yeah, that gives you a feel for their footprint in this massive industry.
All right, so we've got a pretty good handle on what Incyte does.
Yeah, the business side is clear.
Now let's turn our attention to the people at the helm.
The management team.
What can we learn from their track record?
Well, the CEO is Hervé Hopnot.
Okay.
He's been leading the charge since 2014,
Got it.
and he became chairman in 2015.
Okay.
Under his watch, Incyte has seen some serious growth.
Like what kind of growth?
Well, they've tripled their clinical development pipeline for one, and they've expanded into inflammation and autoimmunity.
So he's been busy.
Yeah, and his past experience at Novartis Oncology and Aventis is a big asset.
So he knows the industry.
Oh yeah, he's a veteran.
Now what about Pablo J. Cagnoni?
Yeah, he joined as president and head of R&D in 2023.
Okay.
He brings a history of successful drug development and approvals to the table.
So another experienced leader.
Absolutely, a strong team at the top.
But how have they handled challenges or, any bumps in the road?
Right. Well, we did find a $12.6 million settlement with the Department of Justice in 2021.
What was that about?
It was related to allegations of kickbacks.
Oh, that's not good.
No, it's definitely something to be aware of.
Yeah.
They also won a lawsuit in 2018.
Okay.
It was about trade secret theft, but they didn't get any monetary damages.
Interesting.
And then in 2024, there was a lawsuit regarding COVID-19 vaccine mandates.
Okay, so a few legal issues to consider.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, how about their communication with investors and the public? Are they transparent?
They seem to prioritize transparency.
Okay, that's good.
They have an investor relations website with press releases, financial reports, and FAQs.
So they're putting information out there.
Yeah. And they also publish a global responsibility report and emphasize compliance and ethical conduct.
That's a good sign.
And their earnings call transcripts are publicly available.
Okay, so pretty good transparency overall.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Now let's talk about their resource allocation.
Okay, capital allocation.
What's their strategy?
Well, they put a big chunk of their capital towards research and development.
Which makes sense for a biotech company.
Yeah, got to keep innovating.
They're also investing in expanding their infrastructure and workforce.
Yep, got to have the people and the space to do the work.
Now, we've also seen them make some strategic acquisitions.
Yeah, like Villaris Therapeutics in 2022 and Incyte Pharmaceuticals in 2024.
Okay.
But it's worth noting that there have been some challenges with the Incyte acquisition.
Like what?
Things like pauses in trials.
Oh, that's not ideal.
No, it just highlights the risks involved in M&A in this sector.
Makes sense.
Now, on a different note, they've been actively repurchasing their own stock.
Oh, really?
Yeah, $2 billion worth in 2024.
Wow, that's significant.
It is. And they're not paying any dividends right now.
Okay, so they're choosing to reinvest earnings for growth or buybacks.
Exactly. That's their current approach.
Now let's dive into their financials. What metrics are we looking at?
As of March 2025, their market cap is about $11.98 billion.
Okay.
Now, the price-to-earnings ratio, or PE ratio, is a bit all over the place depending on the source.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it ranges from the low 30s to over 200.
Wow, that's a big difference.
It is, and it's because different sources use different earnings figures.
Okay.
Some use GAAP earnings, others use non-GAAP.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the time frame trailing 12 months versus forward estimates.
Well, it's important to know what you're looking at.
Absolutely got to compare apples to apples.
Okay, so what about their revenue growth?
2024 saw a solid 15% growth.
Okay.
Their gross profit margin is very high, around 92.6%.
Wow, that's amazing.
But their operating margin for 2024 was much lower at 2.4%,
Okay.
and their net profit margin even lower at about 0.8%.
So that's a pretty big drop from the gross margin to the net margin.
Yeah, it tells us that their operating expenses are eating into their profits.
And that's probably due to the heavy R&D spending.
Most likely.
But on a positive note, their debt-to-equity ratio is super low.
Yeah, around 0.01.
So their balance sheet is strong.
Very strong minimal debt.
They're also generating positive free cash flow.
Yep, $358.98 million in the fourth quarter of 2024.
And their price-to-book ratio is consistently around 3.5.
Right.
So we're seeing strong revenue growth and a solid financial foundation, but their current profitability is low.
Yeah, that's the trade-off they're making.
What does this tell us about their financial stability in the long run?
Well, their earnings have been a bit up and down over the past 5 to 10 years.
Oh.
Sometimes they've had net losses, other times profits.
That's not unusual for a biotech company, right?
Right, especially with all the R&D investment.
The success of their clinical trials and drug approvals can really make a difference.
It's a high-risk, high-reward industry.
And they're not paying dividends, which is also typical for a growth-oriented company.
Yeah, they're plowing those earnings back into the business.
But their low debt level gives them a safety net.
Absolutely, it's a strong sign of stability.
And their working capital efficiency seems good, too.
Yeah, indicating they have enough liquid assets to cover their short-term obligation.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
All right, round 2.
We're ready to dig into how the market is viewing Incyte right now.
Market sentiment.
What's the general feeling?
It's kind of a mixed bag, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, the stock price tends to react pretty strongly to news,
What kind of news?
especially earnings reports and clinical trial outcomes.
Ah, that makes sense.
For example, their stock took a hit after the recent phase 3 trial results for povorcitinib,
Oh, right. I remember that.
so it's a bit sensitive.
Okay.
Analyst ratings are currently at a moderate buy consensus.
So cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, but there's a wide range of individual price targets.
Interesting.
The average target does suggest some potential upside from the current price.
Okay, so there's potential, but it's not a sure thing.
Exactly, I got to be careful.
Let's break down those analyst press targets a bit more.
All right, so as of March 2025, we're looking at 18 to 21 analysts covering Incyte.
Okay.
Their average price target falls between 75.35 and 75.93.
Right.
That translates to a potential upside of roughly 23–24%.
Not bad.
No, not at all. But the highest price target is $100,
Wow.
and the lowest is $52.
That's a huge gap.
It shows you the range of opinions and the uncertainty surrounding the stock.
So there's a lot to consider.
For sure.
Now let's move on to ownership. Who are the key players holding Incyte's stock?
All right, so institutional ownership is pretty high.
Meaning,
Big investment firms like Baker Bros Advisors, Vanguard Group, and BlackRock hold a lot of the shares.
okay.
That level of institutional investment usually indicates some confidence in the company's long-term prospects.
They're putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly.
Now what about insider ownership?
That's actually relatively low,
Interesting.
and recent trading suggests more selling than buying by insiders.
That could be a red flag.
Well, it could mean they're not as confident in the near term,
Okay.
or it could just be personal financial decisions.
Right, we can't read too much into it.
Exactly.
But it's something to keep an eye on. And it's also worth noting that ownership is fairly concentrated among the top institutions.
Yeah, Baker Bros Advisors holds a particularly large stake, around 16%.
So they have a lot of influence.
They do.
What about the governance structure? How is the company managed?
Incyte has a board of directors with expertise in the biopharmaceutical industry,
Okay.
and they operate through several committees focused on things like audit and finance compensation nominating and governance and science and technology.
So they're covering all the bases.
Yeah. Seems well structured.
And they have a code of conduct and ethics.
Yep, publicly available too.
So they're promoting ethical behavior.
Seems that way.
Now let's move on to the SWOT analysis.
The risks and opportunities.
This is where we really assess Incyte's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Right, the big picture.
So let's start with their strengths. What are they doing well?
Okay, so their focus on serious and rare diseases is a major strength,
Okay.
especially in oncology and myelofibrosis.
They're targeting those niche markets.
Exactly, and they have a robust pipeline of innovative targeted therapies.
So they're not standing still.
No, they're constantly developing new treatments.
And their commitment to R&D is huge.
Yeah, they're investing heavily in the future.
And their partnerships with those major pharmaceutical companies.
That gives them access to valuable resources and expertise.
It's a smart strategy.
Definitely. And let's not forget their strong intellectual property portfolio.
Those patents are crucial.
Absolutely. And they have an experienced management team.
It's a lot of strengths to build on.
Yeah, they're in a good position.
But what about their weaknesses? Where are they vulnerable?
Well, their dependence on a small number of key products is a risk.
Especially to coffee.
Exactly. That's a lot of eggs in one basket.
And all that R&D spending, while important, does impact their current profitability.
Yeah, it's a trade-off they're making.
And we can't ignore those past legal issues.
The kickback settlement does raise some concerns.
And their earnings have been a bit volatile.
Yeah, something we'll watch closely.
Now let's switch gears and talk about opportunities. What are their potential growth areas?
Well, the markets for targeted oncology therapies and treatments for rare diseases are growing rapidly.
So there's a lot of demand.
Yeah, and they could potentially expand the uses of their existing drugs.
To treat other conditions?
Exactly, new indications.
Their focus on precision medicine is also a big opportunity.
It aligns perfectly with the direction healthcare is heading.
And they're always open to new research collaborations.
Yeah, they're not afraid to partner up.
And of course, successful development of their pipeline drugs could be a game changer.
That's the big one. Future revenue potential is huge.
So a lot of exciting opportunities on the horizon.
For sure.
But we also need to consider the threats.
Right. What could derail their plans?
Well, the biggest one is probably competition from generic drugs.
Yeah, especially when Jakafi's patent expires in 2028.
That's a big one.
It is, and they're facing tough competition in the oncology and IAI markets in general.
Other companies are innovating too.
Yeah, it's a constant race.
And regulatory setbacks and delays are always a possibility.
That's the nature of the industry.
And new therapies developed by competitors could disrupt the market.
It happens all the time.
And then there's pricing pressures and changes in healthcare regulations.
Yeah, those are external factors that are hard to control.
And we've seen that clinical trials can be unpredictable.
The assign acquisition challenges are a perfect example.
So there are definitely some threats to keep in mind.
Absolutely. It's not all smooth sailing.
All right, so taking all of this into account, what's your overall conclusion about Incyte?
That's a complicated picture.
As with most investments, I imagine.
Yeah, they have some big strengths in growing markets.
Okay.
And they're clearly committed to innovation.
But they're also facing some significant risks.
Yeah, that dependence on key products and the impact of R&D spending on their current profitability.
The success of their pipeline is going to be crucial.
Absolutely, especially with Jakafi's patent expiring soon.
Now, their management team is experienced, but those legal issues and acquisition challenges are worth watching.
Yeah, definitely.
On the plus side, their strong balance sheet gives them some breathing room.
Yeah, it's a good foundation.
So overall, I'd say Incyte has strong growth potential.
Yeah, but it comes with the inherent risks of the biotech industry.
High risk, high reward.
Exactly.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay, a final thought.
So Incyte's mission is solve on, right?
Right, tackling those unmet medical needs.
And they're facing that patent cliff with Jakafi.
Yeah, that's looming.
So what kind of innovative breakthrough would really define their next decade?
That's a good question.
Something that would have a huge impact on both patients and investors.
Something to ponder.
Definitely.
Well, we encourage everyone listening to dig deeper into Incyte's pipeline.
Yeah, do your own research.
And look at the competitive landscape.
See how they stack up.
Exactly.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe to the Stock Analytics AI YouTube channel.
Yeah, we've got more in-depth analyses coming your way.
And you'll find any specific stock suggestions related to this analysis in the comments section of the associated YouTube video.
Just a reminder, this deep dive is based on research and analysis of publicly available information.
It's not financial advice?
No, just our take on the situation.
And this research did incorporate some AI analysis.
Yeah, we used AI to help us synthesize information from multiple sources.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Incyte.
See you next time.